The Arizona plains in 1875 stretched like a vast untamed wilderness of brittle grass and sun-bleached earth, a desolate expanse near Sagebrush Hollow, where the dry wind kicked up dust clouds that stung the eyes and never ceased, its ceaseless murmur weaving tales of survival, loss, and resilience amid the prairie frontier. Sagebrush Hollow, a remote ranch perched on the edge of this harsh terrain, stood weathered under a dusty sky still clinging to the afternoon's heat, its wooden fences sagging under years of neglect, its barren yard whispering of a solitude long endured. Elias Kane rode slowly toward the corral, his horse breathing heavily beneath him, each hoofstep leaving a faint imprint in the cracked earth, the weight of a long day's rest pressing on his 52-year-old frame. His face, rugged with a weathered brow and a mane of silver hair, was framed by a wide-brimmed hat. His broad shoulders stooped under the grief of burying his wife 20 years past, beneath a lone cottonwood that leaned toward the dry creek like a broken sentinel. Since then, he had lived alone, not by choice but necessity, the ranch bearing the shape of her memory. Her faded bonnet still hung on a peg he never touched, a shelf of old books gathering dust, the hearth, cold, without her warmth. His son, lost to a cattle stampede, had stopped him from dreaming of family. Instead, he tended a small herd, mended fences, and kept to himself. The town whispered of the retired cowboy who rarely spoke, some calling him hardened by loss, others saying he'd always been that way. He'd been out since dawn, checking the fences for signs of wear after a storm had ravaged the hollow 2 nights prior, the thunderous skies having scattered his few remaining cattle. His back ached with the effort, a persistent reminder of years in the saddle, and the solitude of the prairie had become a refuge from a world that had taken everything. As he approached the ranch's gate, a faint sound broke the stillness, not the rustle of wind or the call of a hawk, but a chorus of voices, soft and pleading, cutting through the dust. His head snapped up, scanning the horizon, squinting against the glare. Movement caught his eye, 5 figures staggering toward the gate, their forms shadowed by the fading light, their silhouettes weary yet determined. Instinct surged through him, a rare break in his calm. Without thought, he spurred his horse forward, the animal's hooves pounding the earth as he dismounted with a heavy thud. His rifle in hand, the figures were women, Apache widows by their attire, tattered buckskin dresses stained with dust and tears, their dark hair tangled with sagebrush, their faces etched with exhaustion and despair. The eldest, Lila, stepped forward, her voice breaking as she spoke for the group. "Shelter, please, they're after us." Behind her stood Mara, Sienna, Tala, and Nita, each holding a child or supporting another, their eyes wide with fear. Among them, Mara cradled a small boy, Quay, no more than 2, his tiny body frail and silent, his lips cracked from dehydration. Elias froze, his breath catching, the weight of their plea sinking into his chest like a slow tide. He said nothing, his jaw tightening, his massive hands steadying the rifle as he studied them. Their dresses were torn, their wrists marked with faint rope burns, their postures defiant yet crumbling under the weight of loss. Quay whimpered faintly, his small hand clutching Mara's dress, his pale face a mirror of starvation. Elias's mind raced. Why would widows beg so? Who pursued them? The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken pain, until he stepped forward, lowering his rifle. He gestured toward the ranch house, his voice low and rough, breaking his usual silence. "Come in." The women hesitated, their eyes searching his, then followed, their steps faltering but grateful. He later learned their names: Lila, Mara, Sienna, Tala, Nita, each a survivor of a tragedy he was yet to unravel. He led them to the ranch house, its door creaking as he pushed it open, the interior dim and dusty, the hearth cold and empty. Inside, he laid them on cots, covering them with every blanket he owned, removing their worn moccasins to check for wounds. Mara's ankle was swollen but not broken, and he hesitated at their dresses, draping his coat over them before turning to light the fire. Quay clung to Mara, his small face pressed against her chest, his breathing shallow but steady. Kneeling by the cold hearth, he struck a match, his hand still trembling, the flame catching slowly on the dry wood. Once it took, he stood and met their gazes. They watched him, silently, their eyes a mix of gratitude and wariness. "You're safe here," he said, his voice low and even. Lila nodded faintly, and he pulled a chair to the far corner, sitting to guard them through the night, his jaw tight with the uncertainty of what he'd taken on. The storm outside raged, its thunder a backdrop to the quiet within. By dawn, the fire crackled steadily, its orange glow brushing the cots where the widows and Quay lay. Their breathing steadied, color returning to their faces. Elias hadn't slept, remaining in the chair, his damp shirt and aching back a testament to the night's tension. Quay stirred, his small hand reaching for Mara, who held him close, her strength returning with each breath. The women eased upright, their bodies aching from the ordeal, their eyes meeting his watchful, cautious but not hostile. "You understand me?" he asked quietly. A pause, then a nod from Lila. "You hurt anywhere?" Another pause, and Mara touched her ankle, wincing, while Sienna gestured to a cut on her arm. Elias crouched beside them, rewrapping wounds with clean cloths, his hands gentle, their dignity unshaken despite their vulnerability. "Names?" he asked after a long moment. Lila introduced herself and the others, Mara, Sienna, Tala, Nita, each nodding in turn, their accents hinting at Apache roots. He tapped his chest. "Elias." They surveyed the ranch wooden walls, sparse furniture, the rifle near the door, their gazes lingering on it. "Safe here," he said, following their looks. "No one's coming." It was a hope, not a certainty, for widows and a child like them, begging for refuge, likely carrying a past that might follow. He stepped outside to tend his horse, needing space to process, the smoke rising steadily from the chimney a sign of life within. Inside, the women eased upright, their bodies aching from the journey, the silence striking them as unfamiliar yet comforting. Elias's coat smelled of leather and sage, and Mara pulled it closer, studying the chair where he'd watched over them and Quay. When Elias returned with water and dried meat, he found them sitting up, tending to each other, their torn dresses patched with makeshift cloth. He handed out the provisions, and they ate slowly, offering pieces to Quay, their eyes steady. "Where's your family?" he asked carefully. Lila looked away, her jaw tensing, shaking her head firmly. "Tribe?" Another pause then. "Number." Her voice was clear, her accent strong, and though he sensed withheld truth, he let it rest. For the rest of the day they communicated in glances and gestures, him clearing space by the fire, them organizing their meager belongings with quiet purpose. Elias repaired the corral, his mind on the widow's plea and the mystery of their arrival, while Tala kept the fire alive, claiming a role with silent strength. That night, they stayed near the hearth until he climbed into bed, then settled close with Quay, their warmth and the child's soft breaths, a new presence in his solitude. Neither spoke, but the silence had shifted, a bond forming in the wake of their shared resilience, the weight of their past lingering like a shadow. The Arizona plains unfurled like a relentless expanse of brittle grass and fading shadows as Elias Kane, Lila, Mara, Sienna, Tala, Nita, Quay, and the Apache kin ventured away from Sagebrush Hollow, the pale dawn casting long ghostly silhouettes across the prairie terrain. Elias led the way on foot, his weathered coat dusted with prairie dust, his boots crunching through the dry earth, his lasso coiled at his hip, his rifle slung across his back. His face, rugged with a weathered brow, bore a mixture of determination and unease, his silver eyes scanning the horizon for signs of the outlaws, a quiet resolve battling the weight of his past solitude. Lila, the eldest widow in her late 30s, walked beside him, her mended buckskin dress fluttering beneath a borrowed shawl, her wrists still raw from the ropes, her dark eyes sharp with survival. Mara, Sienna, Tala, and Nita followed, their dresses patched and torn, their hands supporting Quay, the 2-year-old boy, his tattered blanket pressed against his chest, his pale face showing signs of recovery from the night's ordeal. A young Apache warrior, Kono, trailed them, his buckskin attire adorned with faded beads, his hands carrying a spear, his presence a silent guardian, flanked by 3 others from the widow's tribe, their faces painted with earth tones, their horses laden with supplies glinting in the weak light. The journey to a hidden tribal camp near Dry Gulch, a 2-day trek, was their goal. But the prairie held other trials to test their fragile alliance. Their water was scarce. The canteen they'd salvaged from Sagebrush Hollow, reduced to a few tepid drops. Their supplies dwindled to a strip of jerky and a handful of dried berries Kono had foraged. The heat bit deep, its intensity a relentless adversary. The silence broken only by the rasp of their breathing, the soft whimper of quay, and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. Elias's mind churned with the previous night's events, his silent choice to shelter the 5 Apache widows, their desperate plea, the arrival of the Apache kin, with their claim of sacred law, the threat of outlaws. He'd acted to ease his own guilt, but their presence now drew danger, a price he hadn't foreseen. He offered Lila water, a gesture of goodwill, his hand trembling slightly from the heat. Lila accepted, her eyes narrowing. "Why risk this for us?" she asked, her voice raw but steady. Elias met her gaze, his brow furrowing. "Lost my wife and boy to a stampede. Can't leave you to die like that." Lila's expression softened, but suspicion lingered, a reflection of a life shaped by loss and betrayal. Kono and the warriors walked with a quiet dignity, their buckskin garments rustling softly, the woven pouch Mara carried catching the fading light. Kono shared their story as they moved, his voice low and resonant. "Outlaws raided our village, killed our men, drove us out. Lila, Mara, Sienna, Tala, and Nita fled with Quay to survive. We've tracked them since, fearing their return," Mara added, her tone firm. "Our tribe abandoned us. We ran to save our children." "A warrior," Nita muttered. "They want our tribal secrets." Elias's heart sank. The pouch likely held something valuable, a lure that had ruined men, but the widows' lives and Quay's safety were worth more. "I'll keep you safe," he said, his resolve firming, though doubt gnawed at him about the pouch's contents. Their progress halted at midday when they reached a trading post tucked into a shallow gully. Prairie outpost, a haven for outlaws and wanderers. Elias needed supplies, his stores depleted after the widow's rescue, but Tala tensed. "Danger here," she warned. "Men talk." Elias nodded, his rifle ready. Inside, the air was stifling, the stench of sweat and stale tobacco thick. A trader named Silas Reed, a wiry man with a sly grin, leaned against a crate, his eyes narrowing. "Elias Kane," he said, "heard you took in 5 Apache widows and a kid. Outlaws are offering a bounty." Elias's jaw tightened, his past with Prairie rumors flashing. "Mind your own, Silas." Reed smirked, his gaze on the pouch. $200 says I tell them where you're headed." Mara's pouch flashed, striking Reed's arm, forcing him back. "Speak, and you bleed," she hissed. Elias stepped forward, his rifle aimed. "Walk away, Silas, this ain't your fight." Reed paled, retreating, his laughter echoing. "They'll hunt you down." Elias cursed under his breath. Reed's treachery would lead the outlaws straight to Dry Gulch. "We move now," he said. The tribe's respect grew, their trust a tentative thread. "You're brave," Nita said. Elias shook his head, the weight of his past pressing down. "I've been a recluse." The ambush came at dusk. Hoofbeats thundered through the grass, and 4 outlaws led by a scar-faced rider named Vance surrounded them near a rocky outcrop. "Hand over the widows, Kane." Vance barked, his rifle raised. Elias fired, his shot grazing Vance's arm, sending him staggering. Lila threw a rock, striking another's shoulder, while Kono's spear felled a third. Elias's second shot dropped a rider, the outcrop falling silent save for the wind's moan. The 4th fled, shouting threats. "They'll burn you out." They took cover behind the rocks, bandaging minor cuts, the heat seeping into their exhaustion. Kono's eyes met Elias's Lidas, his suspicion easing. "You fight for us," he said. Elias wiped dust from his brow furrowing. "Ain't right what they did. I've got regrets of my own." Sienna nodded, her pain surfacing. "They killed our husbands for this pouch." Elias's breath caught the relic was the key, a prize worth killing for. "We'll keep it safe," he said, his resolve hardening. Their bond deepened as they rested, Elias sharing his canteen, Kono offering berries from his pouch. "What's in that pouch?" he asked. Mara held it up, its symbols glowing faintly. "It holds our sacred rites. They want them to hide their crimes." Elias's heart ached, his losses echoing theirs. "I lost my wife and boy to a stampede. Lived alone since." Tala's gaze softened. "We're all broken then. Maybe we heal together." The night stretched ahead, the prairie vast, but the threat of the outlaws grew. Elias taught Lila to use his lasso, her hands steady despite her past, their partnership a lifeline. Kono showed him Apache prairie signs, their trust a flame against the prairie's grip. "You're strong," Elias said. Lila smiled, a rare light in her eyes. You too, friend. The tribe watched, their kinship deepening, a family forged in the crucible of the prairie. But the peace was fleeting. Hoofbeats returned, closer now, Vance and his men, relentless as the heat. Elias chose a defensible ridge, setting up with the tribe behind rocks. We fight if we must, he said, his rifle ready. Kono nodded, his spear poised. Vance's men appeared, their rifles glinting. Last chance, Kane, Vance shouted. Elias fired, his shot dropping a rider, but an arrow grazed Kono's leg, drawing a cry. Mara shielded him, her pouch a talisman, while Nita's spear felled too, forcing the attackers to retreat. They bandaged Kono's leg, Elias's hands gentle. You're all my family now, he said. Nita's eyes met his, a warmth breaking through. And you're ours. The prairie tested them, its dusty trials forging a bond. But the outlaws' wrath loomed larger, a storm they'd face together. Dry Gulch was near, but so was their reckoning. The Arizona plains stretched like an unforgiving ocean of brittle grass and rolling dunes, their surface baking under the relentless glare of a midday sun that churned the air into a shimmering haze of dust and heat, the horizon wavering with mirages of desperation. Elias Kane, Lila, Mara, Sienna, Tala, Nita, Quay, and the Apache kin led by Kono pressed onward, the wagon creaking behind Elias's steady hands, the weary horse plodding through the dry earth with a labored gait, its breath a faint gasp in the stifling air. Elias's weathered coat clung to his broad frame with sweat, his boots sinking into the cracked soil, his lasso coiled at his hip, his rifle slung across his back. His face, rugged with a weathered brow, bore a determined set, his silver eyes scanning the horizon for signs of the outlaws, a quiet resolve battling the weight of his past solitude. Lila, the eldest widow in her late 30s, walked beside him, her mended buckskin dress fluttering beneath a borrowed shawl, her wrists still raw from the ropes, her dark eyes sharp with survival. Mara, Sienna, Tala, and Nita followed, their dresses patched and torn, their hands supporting Quay, the 2-year-old boy, his tattered blanket pressed against his chest, his pale face showing signs of recovery from the night's ordeal. Kono trailed them, his buckskin attire adorned with faded beads, his hands carrying a spear, his presence a silent guardian, flanked by 3 Apache warriors, their faces painted with earth tones, their horses laden with supplies glinting in the weak light. The hidden tribal camp near Dry Gulch, their destination, was a day's journey, but the prairie held other trials to forge their resilience. Their water was nearly gone. The canteen they'd salvaged from Prairie outpost reduced to a few tepid drops. Their supplies dwindled to a strip of jerky and a handful of dried berries Kono had foraged. The heat beat down, its intensity a relentless adversary, the silence broken only by the rasp of their breathing, the soft whimper of Quay, and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. Elias's mind wrestled with his past, his wife and son lost to a stampede, his years of isolation, a guilt that shadowed his every step. The presence of the 5 widows and Quay, a mirror to his loneliness, stirred a compassion he'd buried, their resilience a challenge to his despair. We need to find water soon, Elias said, his voice hoarse from the dry air. Kono nodded, pointing to a faint depression on the prairie floor. There's a dry wash ahead. It might hold a spring, he replied, his Apache wisdom guiding them through the wilderness. The tribe's silence, broken only by soft murmurs and the occasional rustle of supplies, hinted at their vigilance. The pouch Mara carried a burden they shared. They reached the dry wash as the sun peaked, its cracked earth a fleeting mercy against the scorching heat. Elias checked the wagon, its wheels wobbling from the rough terrain, while Sienna and a warrior named Nita scouted for signs of life, her movements aided by a makeshift crutch. The wash offered a shallow pool, its water brackish but drinkable, a rare oasis in the prairie's grip. Elias filled the canteen, offering it to Nita first, his hands trembling from the heat. Drink, friend, he said, the word warm with care. Nita accepted, her eyes softening. Thank you, Elias, she murmured, a rare nod breaking through her stoic demeanor. The moment was brief, but it deepened their bond, a thread of trust weaving through their shared struggle. The prairie's ordeal struck at noon. A dust storm brewed on the horizon, a roiling wall of red dust that swallowed the sky, its roar a test of their endurance. Get down, Elias shouted, pulling Lila, Quay, and the wagon behind a dune, the warriors and horse crowding in. The storm hit like a living entity, its force tearing at their clothes, dust clogging their throats and stinging their eyes. Elias shielded Quay with his body, Lila and Mara huddling close, the tempest raging for hours, leaving them buried in drifts, their water spilled into the sand. As it passed, the prairie revealed a new peril, an outlaw trap, a snare concealed by dust, its metal jaws glinting near Sienna's crutch. Elias reacted instantly, yanking her back, the trap snapping shut inches from her. Kono's quick thinking with his spear dislodged the mechanism, saving them. Good save, Elias said, his respect for them growing. Sienna nodded, her gaze steady. The prairie tests our spirit, she replied. That night they camped in the wash's lee, a small fire their only warmth, its glow casting shadows on the sandy walls. The storm had delayed them, the camp still a day away, and Elias's mind churned with guilt, his family's loss, his years of isolation, now this family's fight. Tala offered him a berry, her hands gentle. You fight for us, she said. Why? Elias poked the fire, his face shadowed. I turned away from help once my wife and boy paid for it. Can't do that again. Quay's eyes, though weak, softened, his small voice whispering, Papa, a word that pierced Elias's heart. The confession hung heavy, a mirror to Elias's regrets. Strength ain't just in surviving, he said. It's in standing together. Mara leaned against him, her voice small. This pouch holds our rights. They want them to erase our past. Elias's heart ached, his losses echoing theirs. I lost my wife and boy to a stampede, lived alone since. Kono's gaze met his, a warmth breaking through. We're all lost then. Maybe we find kin. Their talk was interrupted by a rustle. Apache figures emerged from the dusk, led by a stout woman with a painted face. I am Ayla, Kono's sister, she said, her voice cautious. We saw the storm. Outlaws hunt you. She offered a water skin, her eyes on the widows and Quay. You're alive, sisters. We thought you lost. Lila ran to her, tears in her eyes. Elias saved us. Ayla nodded, offering Elias a feathered cord. You're kin now, Cowboy. The reunion was brief but heartfelt. Ayla's warriors, 15 strong, joined them, their spears glinting. The tracker Vance is near, Ayla warned. He plans an attack at dawn. Elias's heart steadied, his bond with the tribe a shield. We'll be ready, he said. Quay's hand found his trust a beacon. Father, he murmured. The word warmed Elias, a redemption he hadn't sought. The peace shattered as the first light crept over the horizon. Hoofbeats echoed Vance and 12 riders, their rifles ready, their intent clear in the pre-dawn gloom. Ayla's men melted into the sand dunes, leaving Elias and the tribe exposed on the ridge. Hold, Ayla whispered, but Elias stood firm, his rifle raised, the weight of the warning settling in. Vance's voice cut through the heat. Give up the widow's cane or die, Elias fired, his shot grazing a rider, but an arrow struck Ayla's arm, drawing a cry. Tala shielded her, her pouch a talisman, while Kono's spear felled too, forcing Vance to retreat momentarily. They bandaged Ayla's arm, Elias's hands gentle. You're all my family now, he said. Ayla's eyes met his, a warmth breaking through. And you're ours. The prairie tested them, its dusty trials forging a bond. But the outlaws' attack loomed larger, a storm they'd face together. Dry Gulch was near, but so was their reckoning. Dry Gulch rose like a parched wound across the Arizona plains, its treacherous pass of cracked earth and weathered cliffs standing defiant against the encroaching dusk. The sun dipped low, casting a fiery glow across the gulch's rim, the air thick with the scent of sun-scorched grass and the faint promise of a cooling night breeze following the day's relentless heat. Elias Kane, Lila, Mara, Sienna, Tala, Nita, Quay, and the Apache kin, led by Kono, prepared for their stand, the tension palpable in the stillness, heightened by the looming threat of the outlaws' attack. Elias's weathered coat was torn at the hem, his boots caked with dust and blood from his grazed leg, his lasso and rifle poised despite the ache in his muscles. His face, rugged with a weathered brow, bore a grim determination, his silver eyes shadowed by the weight of his past solitude. Lila, the eldest widow in her late 30s, stood beside him, her mended buckskin dress fluttering beneath a borrowed shawl. her arm wound bandaged, her dark eyes resolute with survival. Mara, Sienna, Tala, and Nita flanked her, their dresses patched and torn, their hands supporting Quay, the 2-year-old boy, his tattered blanket pressed against his chest, his pale face showing signs of courage. Kono trailed them, his buckskin attire adorned with faded beads, his leg wound bandaged, his hands wielding a spear, his presence a steady guardian, flanked by 3 Apache warriors, their faces painted with earth tones, their weapons and horses poised for battle. The journey to this refuge had forged their bond. Now tested by the outlaws' relentless pursuit, the gulch offered strategic ground, steep drops for ambushes, rocky outcrops for cover, and a narrow pass for traps. Elias fortified a vantage point with Kono's men, his hands calloused from years of ranching, now skilled in war. Sienna rigged tripwires with sinew, her movements precise despite her exhaustion, her pouch a constant reminder of their burden. The warriors assisted, stacking stones with Nita, their vigilance unwavering. "The outlaws want the pouch," Kono said, his voice low and strained. "They'll kill us for it." Elias nodded, his guilt over past isolation fueling his resolve. "We hold them here," he replied. Nita handed him a sharpened stake, a silent pledge of unity. The weapon's weight a comfort in his hands. Ayla distributed spears and arrows, her warriors blending into the gulch's shadows, their movements silent and deadly. "Vance leads them," she warned. "The attack is imminent." Elias's heart steadied, his bond with the tribe a shield against the encroaching dark. "We fight as family," he said. Quay's small hand found his, a flicker of trust breaking through his fear. "Father," he murmured, a word that warmed Elias's soul. The sentiment lingered, a redemption he hadn't dared hope for, as the wind carried the distant sound of approaching hooves. The conflict, now a reality. As dusk deepened, the air grew taut with anticipation, the gulch's silence broken by the crunch of boots on gravel. The outlaws rode in with 15 men, Vance at their side, the tracker's scar-faced grin a harbinger of violence. Their leader, a broad man in a black duster lined with stolen pelts, dismounted and called out, his voice a thunderclap against the cliffs. "Kane, hand over the widows in that pouch, or this gulch becomes your grave." Elias stepped forward, his rifle raised, his voice firm despite the heat. "You'll have to take them over my dead body," he shouted, his breath visible in the cooling air. The clash erupted like a prairie tempest. The outlaws charged, their rifles and revolvers spitting fire through the dusk. Elias's first shot dropped a rider, the bullet finding its mark with a precision honed by survival. Kono's warriors struck from the shadows, their spears felling 2 more, their movements silent and deadly. Sienna triggered a tripwire, a dynamite cache salvaged from an old trader's stash exploding and sending a shower of dust and rock, scattering the attackers. But the outlaws' numbers were overwhelming, and Vance's rifle was a relentless predator, his bullet grazing Elias's arm, drawing a sharp hiss of pain. Ayla pulled him behind a rock, her arm wound seeping anew. "Stay alive," she growled, loosing an arrow that struck a man's chest, her aim unwavering despite her fatigue. The gulch became a battlefield, its echoes ringing with gunfire and the thud of falling bodies. Elias fired again, dropping another rider, the heat numbing his hands but not his resolve. Kono's warriors fought with primal fury, their spears piercing the fray, while Nita and the warriors lobbed rocks, their forms a surprising force against the rugged terrain. But the outlaw leader's voice cut through the chaos. "Mara, give me the pouch's secret, or they all die." He held a pistol to Kono's head, the warrior's spear shattered, his eyes defiant. Mara's heart sank, her pouch clutched tight. "No," she cried, her voice raw with emotion. Elias's mind raced, he couldn't lose another family. He signaled Kono's men to hold, his gaze locking with Mara's. 10, a silent plea for a plan. Mara stepped forward, her stance defiant despite her wounds. "They killed our husbands," she shouted, her voice carrying over the wind. "They drove us out to hide their massacre." The revelation hit Elias like a thunderclap. The outlaws' greed wasn't just for the pouch, but to silence the widows who knew of their husbands' deaths, a dark secret her tribe had suffered. The leader laughed, his pistol steady. "Then you all die with your defiance." But Mara moved, shoving Elias, Lila, Sienna, Tala, Nita, Quay, and Rose aside as Vance fired, the bullet tearing through her chest. She fell, blood staining the dust, her pouch slipping from her grasp. Elias, no, he roared, lunging to Mara's side, his hands trembling as he pressed against the wound. Kono's warriors charged, their spears a blur, felling 3 men in a surge of vengeance. Nita struck with a rock, stunning a rider, while Isla's arrow found another's leg. Elias tackled Vance, their struggle a tangle of fists and sand, until his lasso coiled around the tracker's neck, ending the threat. The outlaw leader roared, charging with his pistol, but Kono's spear pierced his side, bringing him down. The remaining outlaws fled, their horses vanishing into the dusk. Elias knelt beside Mara, his hands stained with her blood, his heart breaking as he tried to stem the flow. "Hold on," he pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. Her eyes met his, a faint smile breaking through the pain. "You're our brother now," she rasped. "Protect them, the pouch is our truth." Her hand fell, her spirit slipping into the prairie's embrace, her sacrifice, a final act of trust. Ayla bound the leader, her men finishing the fight, the gulch falling silent save for the wind's mournful wail. The outlaws were defeated, their men scattered, but Mara's loss was a wound deeper than the heat. Elias cradled her, tears mixing with the dust on his face, the weight of her words sinking in. Quay, Lila, Sienna, Tala, Nita, Kono, and the warriors approached, placing the pouch, a woven mat, and herbs on her chest. "She was our sister," Quay said, his small voice thick. "Now she's with our ancestors." The Apache carried her to a pyre, their chants rising, a tribute to her courage that echoed through the gulch. Elias stood, his guilt eased by her forgiveness, his promise to protect Quay and the others a new purpose. The gulch smoldered, the air heavy with loss and victory. Ayla offered Elias a place with the tribe, and he nodded. "I'll honor her at the camp," he said, his voice steady. The journey to Dry Gulch had broken the outlaw's grip, but Mara's sacrifice would resonate in the prairie's silence. Elias's redemption was hers, and the pouch, her people's truth, would remain guarded.